Hi, I'm Veda. I'm a colonel in the United States Army, and last week my stepmother tried to humiliate me in public. Again, she booked a dinner under my name, charged it to my card without asking, then mocked me in front of our whole family. A $1,300 trap wrapped in fake smiles and linen napkins, but what they didn't know was that I came prepared. Why would a woman who wore my father's last name bury his will? Why would my own brother stay silent while they erased me, one transaction at a time? And why did a stranger, a waiter, end up being the only person in that room who saw me for who I really was? What do you do when your family calls it love, but it feels like theft? Would you stay quiet or finally speak? The restaurant lighting was soft, warm, the kind meant to flatter conversation and soften truths. I'd picked Carver's table for a reason. It had just the right amount of upscale and quiet, a little sanctuary tucked away in the clamor of the Charlotte Douglas Airport. I figured if we had to have this dinner the night before I moved to DC, it might as well be in a place that didn't smell like fried food or sound like gate announcements. I arrived exactly on time, still in uniform, my travel bag slung neatly over one shoulder. The hostess, a young woman with a sharp bob and neutral lipstick, smiled as I approached. "Hi there. Reservation for Ren," I said. She tapped at her screen, then frowned. "I have a table for Rains, 7 guests." "That's mine," I replied, unsure whether to feel surprised or not. "I made the reservation." She nodded slowly, like the name wasn't ringing any bells for her, then gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "Right this way." I followed her through the rows of occupied tables until we reached a long one tucked next to the restroom hallway. A beautiful table, no doubt, except for the one chair awkwardly pulled away from the rest, clearly an afterthought. That one was mine. Everyone else was already seated. Isolde, my father's second wife, my stepmother, though I stopped calling her that a long time ago, sat at the center like a queen on her throne. Beside her were Harlan and his wife, both absorbed in whatever was on their phones. A couple of cousins I barely knew flanked the ends. "Oh, honey," Isolde purred as I approached. "We weren't sure you'd make it on time with all your military obligations, so we adjusted." I looked at the empty chair, the one that practically kissed the hallway where the restroom door swung open every 5 minutes. They had literally placed me by the toilet, not at the head, not even at the side. The toilet. They adjusted me out, I thought. Classic Isolde, that passive-aggressive art form she's mastered over 2 decades. I set my bag down gently and took the seat, careful not to let my posture show what I was thinking. I scanned the table. No one had stood up, no greeting, no welcome, no, "Hey Veda, congrats on the new post," or even a simple, "Thank you for your service." The silence was louder than the clinks of silverware around us. A waitress appeared and asked cheerily, "And who's hosting this evening?" Before I could speak, Isolde raised her hand with a smile. "That's me, dear. It's just a family dinner. You know, nothing fancy." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Finally, I said, "Actually, I made the reservation." The waitress paused, her eyes bouncing between us. "We're all family here," Isolde interjected quickly, her voice dipped in sugar. "Don't make it complicated." Complicated. That was her favorite word for anything that acknowledged I existed beyond their convenience. I nodded at the waitress and let it drop, not because she was right, but because there was no point in debating with someone who rewrote the narrative every time her image was at stake. The plates arrived, fillets for some, pasta for others. No one asked what I wanted. A spare menu sat folded by the breadbasket, unopened. I stared at it for a second, then pushed it toward the center of the table. I'd already eaten in the lounge earlier, out of caution, or maybe out of habit. As the wine glasses clinked and the noise of casual laughter grew louder, I drifted. My mind wandered to the last time I'd felt truly included in this group. Maybe never. Even as a child, I was always placed at the corner of the kids' table, well into my 30s. No matter the medals, the rank, the years of service, I was still the outsider who had to prove her place, over and over. You can earn medals and still be dismissed at your own table, I remembered hearing on a podcast once. A military spouse said it, and it hit me like a brick then. It hit me harder now. The waitress brought over menus belatedly. I thanked her quietly. Before I could open mine, Isolde leaned in, her voice low but soaked in performance. "You don't mind covering dinner tonight, do you, General?" I looked her straight in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I looked her straight in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't look away. She blinked first, of course. Isolde always did when the show wasn't going her way. The server returned right on cue, checkbook in hand, that soft, professional smile never faltering. "And how would you like to settle this?" Before I could move, Isolde gasped, her voice just the right amount of performative surprise. "Oh, I think I left my wallet in my checked luggage." She looked toward Harlan. "Darling, didn't we agree you'd cover this one?" Harlan stiffened like a kid caught off guard in Sunday school. I mean, I thought—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. Because the next second, all eyes somehow drifted to me, like a cue had been handed out in advance. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just watched them all fumble. One cousin murmured something about a missing purse. Another patted empty pockets like we were in a comedy skit. And there it was. The performance. Their synchronized dance of feigned unpreparedness. This wasn't forgetfulness, I thought, taking a sip of my lukewarm water. This was a stage, and I was cast as the sponsor. Isolde placed a hand on mine, gentle, soft, rehearsed. "You're always so composed, always the reliable one. We're lucky to have you." I smiled, tight-lipped. Luck can be a burden when you're the only one holding it. The silence that followed was more telling than any toast they'd made all evening. As I leaned back slightly in my chair, the chilled condensation of my water glass touched my fingertips, and the flashback hit harder than expected. I was standing at the hospital finance office, years ago, after her stroke. Dad was gone by then, the family too scattered to offer anything real. And there I was, signing papers, handing over my card. No one asked me to, of course, but no one stopped me either. Isolde, lying in the recovery room, managed to say only one thing when I told her the bills were handled. "We're family. Money doesn't count when hearts are involved." Now, apparently, neither did wallets. I looked down at my hand, still clenched slightly around the glass. The knuckles tense but steady. I loosened them, took a breath, and repeated something I'd heard General Colin Powell say in a recorded interview once. "The day people stop bringing you their problems is the day you have stopped leading them." But this wasn't leadership. This was a mutiny in pearls and cashmere. Keaton caught my gaze from across the table. My son didn't say a word, didn't ask what was going on. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough birthdays where my name wasn't on the cake, but my card was at the register. He knew. The server stood waiting, bless his heart. Not awkward, just patient. He wasn't new to this game. He'd seen families like mine before. I could tell by the way his smile didn't falter and his eyes didn't judge. Isolde's voice, sweet as syrup, carried across the table just loud enough for the nearby couple to hear. "Our general here knows how to take command, even when it comes to the bill." Her grin was wide, pleased, victorious. I didn't flinch. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my untouched menu, and turned toward her. My voice was low but clear, a soft click behind every word. Is that all you brought me here for? Isolde didn't answer. She just picked up her wine glass like we were discussing the weather. That smile of hers, practiced, unfazed, the same one she wore at Dad's funeral like it was a garden party, lingered a second longer than necessary. She tilted her head and sipped, watching me over the rim like she was daring me to break the performance. I didn't. Not yet. I adjusted the cuff of my uniform jacket, partly to give my hands something to do, partly because the air near the restroom door had gotten uncomfortably drafty. The face of my father's old military watch glinted under the low light. I caught it before Isolde did. "That thing still works?" she asked, smirking. "Looks like it came out of a museum." A few heads turned. One cousin snickered. Another, bless her spineless heart, looked away. I didn't blink. "It did," I said calmly. "The museum of people who actually built something instead of inheriting it." Isolde raised her brows, but she didn't push. She never did when she knew she'd stepped a little too far. But that didn't stop the shift in the room, the barely contained awkwardness, the clink of glassware that seemed louder than before. That watch wasn't just a relic, I thought. It was a reminder of the man who raised me, who believed in silence more than show. The same man who'd warned me, "They'll test your loyalty every way they can. Don't let them make you pay for staying loyal to people who aren't." That voice came back when the waiter placed the check discreetly by my elbow. Without a word, I slid the folder to the center of the table. No one moved. It just sat there, like a hot coal we were all pretending wasn't burning a hole through the linens. "If this is a celebration dinner," I finally said, voice even, "I don't recall being told it was mine to fund." Isolde didn't miss a beat. "Sweetheart, it's not about money. It's about honoring the moment." I smiled, but not with my mouth. "Then honor it equally." Another pause. One of the cousins coughed. Harlan looked everywhere but at me. I scanned their faces. All of them knew. None of them were surprised. I remembered another dinner years ago. Very different restaurant, similar air. Isolde had just gotten out of surgery. Dad had passed by then. I had stayed behind in Charlotte to help. They'd needed someone to drive her, pick up prescriptions, handle paperwork. The Pentagon had offered me an early promotion track. I turned it down. Not one of them had said thank you. But when I paid for the rehab and meal delivery, Harlan had said, "That's what families do," just like that, as if I was fulfilling a job description instead of offering grace. "There's a price to silence, kid," Dad's voice echoed again in my mind. "Eventually, you either pay it or you speak." I'd paid for years. Every seat I didn't fight for, every tab I picked up, every favor disguised as love, I paid in pieces of my own voice. I looked at Keaton. He wasn't speaking, but his eyes were locked on mine. He didn't need to say it. He knew the playbook. Harlan finally reached into his blazer, pulling out his wallet. The air shifted just slightly, but before he could lift the flap, Isolde laid a manicured hand on his wrist. "Let her do it," she said sweetly. "She's a general. She can handle it." My gaze didn't waver. I turned to her slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Is that what you think strength looks like?" Isolde lifted her glass slowly, her smile as polished as the stemware. "To the only real general in the room," she said, making direct eye contact with our waiter before letting her gaze land on me. The table chuckled. Not loudly, just enough to fill the air with something that sounded like support, but sat more like smoke in the back of my throat. "To leadership," I replied, raising my water glass. "May we someday recognize it when it's quiet." That got no laughter, just shifting in chairs and someone clearing their throat too loudly. I watched her eyes flicker, briefly. She wasn't mocking me for humor. That wasn't her game. She was staking her ground, reminding everyone who she believed still controlled the narrative. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. A moment later, the waiter returned and paused by my shoulder with his notepad in hand, voice polite, eyes neutral. "Ma'am, would you mind confirming the name on the card used for the earlier reservation?" That gave me pause. I reached into my purse, pulling out my wallet, flipping to the silver travel card I barely touched these days. And there it was, an authorization from 3 hours ago. Carver's Table. This restaurant. My name. My card. My stomach didn't drop. It clenched, but in the kind of way that had nothing to do with fear, just clarity, cold and clean. I tilted the card toward the candlelight and met the waiter's eyes. "This charge went through before I arrived. Who gave it to you?" He hesitated, but only slightly. "Mrs. Raines confirmed the pre-authorization when she arrived. She said the table was under her direction and used the card you've had on file." My throat didn't tighten, my jaw didn't clench. I just nodded. "Thank you," I said. Isolde hadn't even looked up from her glass. The wine danced inside the bowl like she was listening to classical music only she could hear. I stared at her, then back at the card in my hand. That card hadn't left my wallet in months, except for work, except years ago when Isolde had asked to borrow it for a family emergency. Something about needing it to book a hotel for one of my cousin's wedding weekends. She'd said she'd destroy the info right after. Of course, she hadn't. She'd held on to it, just like she held on to every piece of leverage she could dress up as dependency. I called the waiter back, careful with my tone. "Did she give you this card directly or just the numbers?" "She gave us the physical card. It matched your name," he answered softly. "I assumed it was authorized." Harlan had frozen halfway through cutting into his steak. He wasn't looking at anyone. Isolde finally broke her quiet. She looked over her glass at me, her voice honeyed. "Oh, I thought it was still on file." "We all share, don't we?" My tone didn't rise, but it sharpened. "No, we don't. And this isn't sharing, it's stealing in pearls." The fork in Harlan's hand clinked against his plate. Isolde leaned back, unfazed, crossing one leg over the other. "Honestly, Veda, it's a dinner. You make it sound like I bought a yacht. You used my name. You used my history with this place. You used my presence without my permission," I said, voice even. "And now you're trying to make it seem like it's generosity." "It's family," she replied, reaching for her glass again. "No," I corrected her. "It's theft wrapped in etiquette." A ripple went through the table. Nobody said a word, but everyone heard it. Keaton looked up from his phone. He wasn't smiling. He knew this moment. He'd seen versions of it his whole life. Me, cornered politely, publicly, and asked to stay quiet for the sake of harmony. Not this time. I opened my phone under the table, tapped through to the banking app, and pulled up the charge history. Every swipe, every entry was time-stamped and itemized. I highlighted the line with the pre-charge from that afternoon. Then I turned to Keaton. "I need you to do something," I said quietly. He leaned in. I whispered only a few words, and he nodded. The moment Keaton tapped record on his phone, something shifted in me. It wasn't rage, not the kind that explodes. It was quieter, sharper, like a string pulled just tight enough to hum, not snap. Dessert had just been set down, each plate a perfect circle of sugar and performance. I didn't touch mine. I couldn't tell if the sweetness made me nauseous or if it was the bitterness building in the pit of my stomach. Probably both. The waiter placed the final check on the table, clearing his throat just loud enough to be heard, just soft enough not to intrude. He knew, maybe not the details, but he understood tension. Most people in hospitality do. They read it like weather. I opened the leather folder and stared at the number printed at the bottom, $1,300, not including tip. A small gasp came from someone. Aunt Robin, maybe. Isolde clapped lightly, beaming as if the bill were a birthday surprise. "Well, look at that," she sang. "Such a beautiful number." "What a memory to leave with, right?" No one responded. A few fork tines scraped ceramic. Harlan gave a limp laugh and took a sip of his drink, suddenly very interested in the bubbles on the rim of his glass. I didn't speak. Instead, I pulled my phone from my lap and opened the banking app. My fingers didn't shake. They never did when clarity kicked in. The authorization log stared back at me like a second punch. Same card, same restaurant, 2 charges, one from 2:19 p.m. Hours before I even stepped foot in the building, one from now. It wasn't dinner, I thought. It was a setup, and I was the fool who walked into the theater thinking it was real. I closed the app. The image burned into memory. I breathed in through my nose, slowly, deliberately. My coat shifted slightly against my hip, and I remembered what I'd tucked inside earlier that day, before boarding the plane. The letter from my father's study. Sealed. Labeled in his handwriting, "If they ever try again." Inside, I'd found the words I hadn't realized I'd been needing for years. "You've always been the one who wouldn't play dirty. That's your strength. But don't mistake silence for peace. Speak when it's time." It was time. I rose from my chair, calmly, lifting my glass, not the dessert fork, not a shout, just the glass. The movement alone was enough to draw every eye. "To every uninvited guest," I said, "who still shows up, pays the bill, and doesn't leave early." A beat of silence. Then I continued. "I didn't come here to remind you I exist. I came here to remember I no longer need to be included." No one moved. Keaton's camera kept rolling. Harlan tried to say something, voice catching halfway through. Maybe this wasn't the right time, or... I didn't let him finish. "Time was never the problem," I said. "Transparency was." The silence after that was thick, like syrup left too long on the stove. No one chewed. No one swallowed. The performance was unraveling. I turned to the waiter, who had been waiting a respectable distance away. "Can I see who pre-authorized this charge again?" He blinked, nodded slightly. "Actually, we have it on camera. Would you like to see the footage?" I didn't look at Harlan. I didn't glance at the cousins or the aunts. I didn't check Keaton. I looked directly at Isolde. "Yes," I said, voice clear, calm. "Let's all watch the truth together, shall we?" But Isolde only smiled and said, "You really want to do this here?" "Yes," I said. "Here is perfect." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean in. I just kept my eyes on her like a steady rifle scope, waiting to see which inch of her confidence would flinch first. She didn't blink. But her smile, it twitched, just enough to tell me this wasn't a script she had prepared for. The waiter returned. Same one, polite and exact. This time, though, he wasn't carrying a dessert tray. Instead, he held a small envelope and what looked like a printed receipt in one hand, a flash drive in the other. "I was able to retrieve the timestamp logs, ma'am," he said, handing them to me with a subtle nod. "This includes the reservation pre-authorization from this afternoon and a copy of the camera footage, as requested." I glanced around the table. No one was speaking now. Even Harlan, who usually couldn't help but fill silence with some half-formed opinion, stared at the folded napkin in his lap like it might offer him advice. I took the paper gently, eyes scanning the ink. 2 charges, one authorized at 2:19 p.m., today under my name, one now. Same card, same terminal, same account, but only one person had access to the physical card. I looked at the waiter. Who handed you the card under my name? He hesitated. Not long, but enough. Mrs. Raines presented it when confirming the booking this afternoon, he replied. She said it was already cleared. There it was, out loud. Isolde shrugged. It's not my fault if your name's on the card, dear. No shame, not even the performance of remorse. She sipped her wine like we were talking about someone else's scandal. She was bold enough to do it, I thought, and confident I wouldn't call her out, until now. I set the paper flat on the table. My voice was calm, but every syllable had edges. This is the last time anyone uses my silence as a payment method. Dorian, the waiter, stood to my side. Then, unexpectedly, he straightened his posture, fully upright, chin raised. General, he said, his voice firm and clear, your transportation has arrived. The entire table froze. Keaton sat up straighter in his seat. Harlan looked like he'd swallowed his ice water wrong and needed divine intervention. Isolde blinked, but caught herself mid-glare. I nodded at Dorian. Thank you. The room wasn't silent, it was aware. Conversations around us slowed. The woman seated behind me whispered to her daughter, She's military? Her voice was laced with that half-pride, half-awe tone, reserved for men in uniform. The irony made my stomach turn. Isolde's voice broke the stillness. You brought a driver? I didn't need to, I said, still looking at the paper in front of me. Some people volunteer to serve, without taking anything in return. I turned back to Dorian. May I take a photo of this log? He handed it to me without hesitation. I pulled my phone from the inside pocket of my coat and snapped a clear shot of the page. Not for social media, for proof, for peace. As I lowered my phone, one of the cousins at the far end of the table shifted in his seat. Look, maybe we should just let this go. It's dinner. This isn't worth... It's already being uploaded, Keaton said, voice flat but firm. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't blinking. Just calmly stating a fact that made Isolde's wine glass pause mid-air. She turned to him slowly. You what? He met her eyes. Someone had to tell the truth. And you didn't ask for privacy when you used someone else's money. The air snapped like elastic. Everyone knew it had happened. The only thing left was deciding who'd pretend it hadn't. Isolde's smile returned, this time, tighter. She set her wine glass down deliberately, fingertips tapping the rim twice. You may wear the uniform, dear, she said softly, but you've forgotten the rules of the house. I leaned in just slightly. This isn't your house anymore. The table had split. You could feel it in the way everyone shifted, how the silverware stilled mid-air and the air thickened with something just short of panic. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was exposure. No one reached for their glasses. No one spoke. Even the clinking from other tables faded into something distant. And then, Dorian. He returned like a ghost, quiet, measured. No tray this time, just a folded note, carefully placed beside my dessert plate. I opened it slowly. I didn't forget. You testified for me. I never got to say thank you. Stay strong. My fingers curled slightly, not in shock, but in something deeper, recognition, not of him, but of what it meant. Dorian, the waiter who had saluted me earlier, had once been just another name on a stack of case files, a Marine with a contested discharge, caught in bureaucratic quicksand. I testified, quietly, no fanfare. The people I once served remember me, the ones I served dinner to. Pretend they never saw me. Just as I tucked the note away, my phone buzzed under the table. A message lit up the screen, encrypted and brief. Confirmed. Multiple transfers. Paper trail solid. She's been moving funds under your name. Shall we proceed? It was from my father's former attorney. I'd asked for a quiet audit weeks ago, just in case. I typed one word in reply. Proceed. They taught me battlefield strategy. I just never thought I'd use it in a dining room. Isolde must have sensed something shifting. She straightened, voice sharpening as she stood, still holding her wine glass like a scepter. This little display is unbecoming. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't flinch. Better to be embarrassed than complicit. Keaton, who had barely touched his food since this all began, leaned in toward Harlan and whispered, "Are you going to say anything? Or just keep watching her take all the hits?" Harlan didn't respond. But the shame finally cracked through his polished silence. Isolde's voice raised again, shaky now. "I gave you my husband's name. I gave you this table. I gave you. You gave me debt, silence, and the illusion of place," I said, cutting her off, voice low but steady. That's all. The words didn't land like punches. They landed like truth, and truth doesn't need to shout. Then, another buzz. My screen lit up. Bank alert. Shared account, access blocked. I didn't need to look at Isolde. I heard the soft intake of her breath. The silence from her side of the table spoke louder than any protest. I slowly raised my head, met her eyes. "It starts now." She reached for her purse, not to pay, those days were over, but to shield herself, to retreat behind something familiar. But it wasn't power she clutched anymore. Not really. Not with that tight smile slipping like cheap fabric under the weight of truth. Keaton's phone buzzed, then mine, then Harlan's. Across the table, a symphony of vibrations broke the tension like glass cracking under pressure. One by one, relatives began to look down at their screens. The silence wasn't peace, it was alarm. "Veda," one cousin muttered, "is this real?" I didn't answer. The video played on every phone. Isolde, earlier that day, handing over my card, waving off the waiter's quiet hesitation, and her voice, recorded with pristine clarity, laughing. "Oh, she won't mind. She's used to footing the family tab, especially when she gets to wear that shiny little title." They used silence as currency. Now let's see how they pay for attention. I sat still as the footage spread like wildfire through the family group chat. Someone across the restaurant caught wind of it. Maybe the whispering had turned to pointing, and within minutes, I heard a man mutter, "Is that the military lady from the clip?" Behind me, Isolde reached for her napkin. It fell with that same practiced flick she'd used for decades, meant to signal finality, dominance, dismissal. But no one looked at her, not this time. All eyes stayed on me or their screens. "That move used to work when no one was watching," I said evenly, not gloating, just stating. She opened her mouth, but the performance faltered. "This is slander," she said, voice uneven. "And it's public." "So was the humiliation," I replied. "Difference is, this time, it's the truth." Her mouth opened again, but nothing came out. Then Harlan, my quiet half-brother, her loyal shadow, finally found his voice. "I didn't know she still had your card. I thought you let it go." "You never asked," I said, turning toward him, calm and sharp. "You just assumed I'd never speak." Dorian approached our table again, this time slower, eyes scanning the energy in the room like a seasoned soldier gauging a battlefield. "You've got a crowd out there," he said under his breath. "Press, maybe? You want me to call security?" "No," I replied. "Let them come. Let them see the end of this chapter." Isolde was shrinking in her seat now, chin lifted but posture trembling. Her gaze snapped to Harlan. "Are you just going to let her do this?" she snapped, desperate. He stared at her for a long moment, then stood slowly. "She didn't start it, Mom," he said quietly. "She just stopped hiding it." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was earned. I stood. Keaton mirrored me. From my coat, I pulled a manila envelope. Inside were printed documents, legal, notarized, final. I placed them on the table without ceremony. This was never just about dinner, I said. It's been about erasure. This is the end of that. The moment hung there, still, sharp, and final. I stepped back from the table, letting my eyes sweep once more across the people who had learned to treat me like a utility, a uniform, a blank check with no expiration date. The bill's paid, I said. Now comes the audit. And behind me, for the first time, no one followed. The click of my heels against the polished tile of the terminal was the only sound I could hear over the ringing silence left behind. It wasn't the absence of voices that made it deafening, it was the absence of resistance, of performance, of anyone trying to stop me. I didn't rush. There was no need to. My steps carried weight now, not from shame, but from certainty. After what felt like a lifetime of carrying silence like armor, I'd finally realized it was okay to lay it down. Near gate B6, I paused to check my phone. The screen lit up with a notification, an email mistakenly forwarded by the estate attorney just before dessert. Subject: Strategy for Transition. From Isolde Rains to Harlan Rains. Date: 3 weeks ago. If we push her out financially and emotionally, she'll step away on her own. No confrontation needed. My thumb hovered over the screen. This wasn't just manipulation. It was a plotted erasure of my presence, my name, my inheritance. She hadn't needed to scream to silence me. She'd just relied on me to keep swallowing it. And she was right. For years, I had. Until now. Veda, I turned. Harlan was jogging up behind me, out of breath like he'd run for something other than exercise for the first time in his life. Can we just talk, one-on-one, without her? I stopped, let the words hang in the air before I turned fully toward him. He looked tired, not from age, but from years of playing quiet in the background. A lifetime of choosing diplomacy over discomfort. I didn't know it was like that, he said softly. I never meant for it to go this far. I studied him for a moment. That's the thing, I said. You didn't mean anything. That was always the difference between us. His shoulders dropped, and for a second I almost pitied him. But pity, like silence, had overstayed its welcome. He extended his hand. I didn't take it. I don't need closure, I said. I need peace, and it doesn't include this anymore. He didn't argue, just nodded once, slow, like a man finally understanding a lesson too late to do anything about it. I turned again and kept walking, past the TSA checkpoint and into the corridor lined with shops trying to sell comfort and overpriced snacks and fleece blankets. I thought the hardest part would be walking out, but it's surviving the silence after. When no one runs after you, and you're still glad they didn't. Dad's voice echoed again, a memory so clear it felt like he was walking beside me. You fight with strategy, but you heal with solitude. Ahead, a digital billboard flashed with looping images, honoring service members during Veterans Month. Uniforms, salutes, names, and then mine. For just a second, a janitor pushing a cleaning cart stopped, glanced between the screen and me, and gave a small nod. No words, just a knowing look. That one nod meant more than every performance behind me. Near my gate, I reached into my coat and pulled out the worn photograph of Dad and me. It was creased from years of living in my wallet. I looked at his eyes, how he smiled like he knew I'd need strength long after he was gone. I tucked the photo into the inside pocket of my coat, close to my heart, permanent. As I stepped forward to scan my boarding pass, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. From Isolde. I didn't press play. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet office that overlooked Constitution Avenue, the city still waking beneath the soft gray haze of an early DC morning. The flag across the street barely moved. It was the first time in months that I had heard my own thoughts clearly. No plates clinking, no passive smiles, no curated silence, just me. The inbox on my secure laptop pinged softly. I expected routine briefings, maybe a few congratulations from colleagues catching up with the news. Instead, I saw a file titled simply, "To VW." It had no sender name, just an encrypted tag. I clicked it open. A video began. A woman's face came into frame, older, anxious, seated at a kitchen table. The background was nondescript, but the voice, she was familiar. She'd worked at the estate. I hadn't seen her since Dad's second Christmas gone. They always said if they could paint her as financially unstable, she began, eyes focused off camera, they could bypass the will without a challenge. I was told to forge card requests, reroute documents. I didn't know who she really was. Until that dinner clip went viral. I should have come forward sooner. I paused the recording, breathing evenly. I wasn't just cut out, I thought. I was cast, rewritten as the angry, unstable outsider in a script I never auditioned for. The phone rang beside me. My attorney's voice was dry but direct. "We have the transfers. She used your credentials to move money, 6 figures over 3 years. It's clean. Do we press?" I leaned back in my chair. "Not yet," I said. "Let them sweat." The control was mine now, but I didn't need to swing it. Not yet. Later that day, a clip of the airport dinner surfaced again. It was being reshared in military forums, veteran support groups, and even political podcasts. No editing, no commentary, just a quiet woman refusing to pay for her own erasure. Someone had posted a quote beneath it. "Some people salute for tradition." I saluted her because she reminded me of what integrity looks like. Dorian. It wasn't the uniform. It never was. It was everything I didn't say, until they forced me to say it all. That evening, I stood alone at my father's grave. The sun dipped behind the clouds, streaking the headstone in shadow and amber light. I placed the photo I'd carried since the airport next to the stone, weighted with a smooth river rock. Then, from my coat, I pulled the printed transcript of the woman's confession and tucked it underneath. "You always said, 'Don't fight battles that don't matter,'" I whispered. Turns out, this one did. My phone buzzed. A message from Harlan. "She's talking about leaving the country." I stared at it, unreadable, then replied, "Let her run. I'm not chasing anyone anymore." I drove back to the city in silence. When I arrived at the Pentagon, the air was crisper than I remembered it. I took the elevator to the new office, larger than anything I'd worked in before. Clean, minimal. Fresh paint still lingered in the corners. I opened the drawer in the main desk. Inside, a white envelope, unmarked except for a single line written in Dad's handwriting. "To the next one, they underestimate." I slid the printout from the confession inside, folded it neatly, and sealed it. Then turned to my computer, logged in, and said quietly to no one in particular, "Let's begin." It was just after midnight when I finally closed my laptop, the last email of the day sent, the notifications muted, the city beyond my apartment window humming low and distant. No meetings, no fires to put out, no footsteps behind me, just me and the hum of peace. I poured a glass of water, leaned against the kitchen counter, and stared at the small envelope still sitting on the edge. Isolde's voicemail. I hadn't touched it since that night at the airport. I hadn't deleted it either. Maybe that was habit. Or maybe it was the kind of closure I never needed but couldn't quite ignore. I picked it up, turned it over slowly in my hand, then walked it to the sink. I didn't press play. I struck a match instead, held it beneath the flap until the flame curled up the edge and dropped the envelope in. The fire danced for a second, no flare, no fury, just a quiet goodbye to everything unsaid and everything I no longer had to hear. They didn't take my father. They didn't erase my name. They just made the mistake of thinking silence means surrender. I went back to my desk and opened my journal, something I hadn't touched since Dad passed. The first blank page stared back at me like it had waited years for this moment. I titled the entry, "What You Took and What I Reclaimed." The words flowed, no editing, no overthinking. You took time, you took peace, you took comfort and bent it into obligation. You took my father's name and wore it like a coat you never earned. But what I reclaimed was louder than any toast you ever gave in my honor. The pages filled. It wasn't a letter, it was a release. Halfway through writing, my phone buzzed again. A single line from Harlan, "Mom's leaving for Lisbon." I stared at it, then typed, "Wish her safe travels." That was it. No sarcasm, no venom, no need to drag it out. Forgiveness wasn't on the menu, but bitterness wasn't either. The truth isn't always something you shout. Sometimes it's just something you no longer have to prove. I sat back in my chair, let the silence settle like a favorite blanket, not because it comforted me, but because it no longer felt like weight. A memory rose, uninvited but clear. At the airport, the night it all came undone, Isolda's youngest granddaughter had looked up at me and asked softly, "Are you really part of our family?" I'd answered her with a tight smile then, but tonight, writing in the stillness of my own space, I finally found my real answer. No, sweetie, I never was, but I made my own. I got up, crossed to the closet, and pulled down the old cedar box marked with Dad's initials. Inside, beneath layers of keepsakes, was a small brass key on a worn leather loop. The tag still attached read, "Cabin, Big Fork." A note folded beside it in Dad's handwriting, "For when you're ready to stop fighting and just breathe." I smiled, folding the paper carefully and placing it back. "Maybe next fall," I whispered. Back at my desk, I finished the journal entry, signed it without hesitation. Cole, Veda Wren, unapologetically standing. My hand hovered over the close button on the screen, but I didn't click it. I hit print instead. The sky above Capitol Hill was a crisp, uninterrupted blue as I climbed the final few steps toward the west entrance. Behind me, the flag stirred only slightly, almost respectfully. Ahead, security nodded me through, their eyes flicking once to my badge, once to my face, then away. It was a different kind of recognition, not the kind earned through name-dropping or inheritance, the kind you build, brick by brick, and defend in silence. I was halfway to the entrance when I heard the voice. "Colonel Wren, how does it feel to be the most visible military whistleblower on family fraud this year?" The reporter didn't yell. She didn't need to. The mic she held already had the network's logo on it. I paused. "Uncomfortable," I said, letting my lips curl into a calm, measured smile. "Necessary." Then I kept walking. That would be the quote they used. That was the headline. Inside, the halls were cool and silent, built to muffle things louder than footsteps: wars, politics, grief. My attorney was waiting near the side exit when the briefing ended, papers in hand. "It's done," he said. "We've frozen the trust. IRS audit is active. Her accounts are being combed through as we speak." I didn't need to ask what "her" meant. He added, "Harlan backed out of the will. He wants no legal attachment moving forward." I nodded. "Let them keep the silverware," I said. "I'll take what can't be stolen." That night, just after 9, he emailed me the recovered will. An anonymous file had been sent to the office, untraceable but clean, dated, signed. My father's original intent made clear. I was the primary heir. Isolda had buried it. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I printed it and filed it under confirmed. Weeks later, I stood on a stage that bore my father's name. The tribute gala wasn't large, just intentional. Veterans, community organizers, former colleagues. Dorian was there, seated in the front row, tie slightly crooked, smile genuine. I stepped to the podium. My father believed in legacy, I said. Some try to build theirs through lies. I built mine by surviving them. There was no mention of Isolde, no name dropped in bitterness, only the names of those who showed up when it mattered. The applause didn't roar, it lingered, warm, measured, earned. A week later, I was picking up a registered letter at the post office when I saw her. Isolde, luggage in tow, passport clutched tightly, a scarf knotted too tightly at the neck. She tried to turn away, but I stepped in front of her. You erased me from your table, I said quietly. I erased you from my future. Fair trade. She didn't speak, just kept walking. So did I. That afternoon, I returned to my office. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out the photograph of Dad and me, one where we weren't posed, just laughing in a moment someone thought to catch. I framed it and placed it beside the plaque I'd received for exemplary service 2 years ago, not for decoration, for grounding. Later that day, my aide entered, holding a padded envelope. Ma'am, this just came in. Looks like a scholarship fund was opened in your name. I blinked. Who set it up? No note, just a trust account from an anonymous donor. The paperwork's solid. I thought for a second, then said, make sure it's for daughters of women who never got their name on the plaque. She nodded. Nothing more needed. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, I sat back in my chair and looked out the window. They wrote me out of their story, I thought. So I wrote my own. In ink they can't erase.